John, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you being on the Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, thanks what you do, Phil. Like I said in my email, what you do really struck home with me, and I appreciate what you do for us.
Hey, great. Thanks a lot.
You're listening to the Phil Ferguson Show on Secular Media Network.
This is Phil Ferguson with Polaris Financial Planning, the home of science-based investing. I see people owning really bad investments all of the time. Many advisors are paid a commission by a big company to sell you something you may not need. It's kind of like church. They create fear, then they tell you what you want to hear, and then they take your money. What you want is an advisor that is paid only by you. That is a fee-only fiduciary advisor. Remember, people work for who they are paid by. You can contact me, Phil, at polarisfinancialplanning.com, or listen to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Each show, we have an interesting investing skeptically topic and an interview with someone fighting to end religion. Polaris also gives 10% of gross revenue to support the growing secular movement. You're not just getting better investments, you're helping to change the world. All right, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed the interview. And once again, I do want to thank John for his service, and anyone that listens that fights for America or your own country, because I know people listen to this all over the world. It's something that I probably I didn't have the courage to do, and I'm not very good with authority, so I have issues, and I chose not to do that. But fear was a big part of it. So I'm always honored and amazed by people who are genuinely, truly braver than I am, who are willing to risk their lives, collectively their lives, so that I can have this plush job in this wonderful country. So I cannot thank you enough. And just another side note, I had this not planned, but the very idea that you can go to war and then survive, maybe with perfect health, but maybe with an injury of some kind, whether it's physical or mental, which of course mental is physical too, but you could come back to your country that you were willing to give everything for, and then you get the shaft when you get back. That's bullshit, and that should never happen. I just want to be perfectly clear that I don't think we can spend too much money taking care of people that come back from war. They should get anything that they need, everything that they need, and those budgets should not be cut. They should not be reduced. They should be expanded. Okay, sorry. That little rant is done. Now I'm going to give you another rant. I told you in the beginning that I was in a mood today. So I had one of my listeners contact me and sent me some information about an annuity that they bought. And like I said before, this is not an indictment of the person who gave me this information. They will probably recognize the situation. It is just meant to illustrate a real-world example of how this stuff works, because sometimes listeners get upset. Well, theoretical examples are nice, but what about real-world examples? So here's another real-world annuity example. I have changed some of the information. So first of all, we're going to call the client, the person, John Smith. All right? It's John Smith, John Doe, whatever you want. It's just not their real name. Obviously, I can't tell you where they live. And I changed some things that are going to make it easier to walk through, because everything is complicated. Another thing that's a problem is that I guess I got to go standard practice here. I go over the word annuity. So real quick, the word annuity has multiple different meanings, even in the investment world. So if you have a tax-sheltered annuity, a TSA, often called a 403B, that's like a 401k, but set up through often a charity, a hospital, a police department, fire department, universities, government contracts, things like that. A 403B is very much like a 401k. It's called, because the law originally called it, a tax-sheltered annuity. That's not what I'm talking about. That's something totally different. The second use of annuity is if you worked a job for a long time, 10, 20, 30 years, and you go to retire, and they're going to offer you a lump sum payment or an annuity. Okay, in that case, depending on the math, the annuity might be a good deal. You've got to do the math. It's a lot of math, or it can be a lot of math, and you must do it and then decide in your situation which one of the 2 or 3 or sometimes 8 different choices you want to take as far as how you want your payments. Not inherently bad, fine. Then the next thing, as far as annuities go, which might be a fixed annuity that pays you a certain fixed rate. In some cases, that's a good thing to get. The number of cases is small, and it's something that if that's what you want, you go shopping. You find multiple people to give you multiple quotes. You don't buy it from the person that happens to bring it to you, and you should have a CPA review it. You should probably have an independent advisor who's not getting paid a big fat commission to review it, even if you have to pay them. So I'm not real keen on those, and we heard John talk about those during his segment that he liked those somewhat or quite a bit. That's fine. A little difference of opinion. But then when you get to variable annuities, universal variable life, indexed fixed annuities, indexed annuities, S&P based annuities, there's no limit to the number of words that they can use and the creativity they can call these things, but it's not a simple fixed rate that you're guaranteed. As soon as it has the possibility of adjusting, no matter what it's adjusted based on, you don't want it. It's too fucking complicated, and I'm going to give you an example. And so John Smith came to me, and at the time he bought this annuity of $100,000, and it's from one of the big companies, and I don't know that I should say the name, Transamerica. Let's say John was 55, and it just so turns out that John, at the time of this purchase, was quite ill, and the medical future was not certain. There was a possibility that John's life expectancy was going to be dramatically shorter than what's expected. So the first thing is that no one should ever buy an annuity if you think your life is going to be short. Because one of the theoretical perks of an annuity is it's going to pay out over your lifetime. Well, if your lifetime is going to be a couple of years, because maybe you have rectal cancer or lung disease or lupus or AIDS or whatever it is, they're still going to use the standard table and pay you out, but maybe only for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so if you're only getting 5% a year for 4 years, you get 20% of your money back. The insurance company keeps the rest of the money, all of it, unless you have a period certain clause, which you might actually have to pay extra for. They'll call it a rider. You might get a 5-year guaranteed payment or a 10-year payment, which goes to your estate or your spouse or your children or a charity, wherever you want it to go. But if you don't have that, once you annuitize an annuity, the money pays until you die unless you have something else in writing. So let me pause for a minute. And there's 2 parts to an annuity. There's the growth phase, where there's certain terms and conditions and you get things based on an incredibly long contract. And then there's the annuitization phase. And once you annuitize, it's really, really difficult to change it. And once you annuitize, it generally doesn't grow anymore, although they might tell you that it does, but it's going to start paying you out money. And it may start in 5 years. It may start tomorrow. But once it's annuitized, you've made a deal. You've signed a contract. You're stuck with it. So if you're in the growth phase of an annuity, you really should examine what the fuck you have, how it works, what it's paying, what it's making versus what you thought it was going to be making. And quite honestly, my bias is to sell it, even if there is a penalty. But let's go back to the specific example. So in this situation, John Smith was told that he would make 5% a year, minimum, guaranteed. Wow, 5% a year, pretty good. You could make up to 12% a year, or even more than 12% a year. There's no cap on it, unlimited upside potential. And it's invested in a blend of stocks and bonds. Okay, well, let's look at that. What would you expect if you put in $100,000 in cash? If you make 5% a year, and we're going to look at it for 5 years, you would expect 5 years later that you would have $126,000. That's 5% a year compounded. Okay, great. But if you make 8% a year, which is the illustration that John received, where they say, this is an illustration of what could happen. So another rule of thumb with annuities and insurance companies, when they give you an illustration, throw it away. It's complete crap. If it's not guaranteed, you're probably not going to get it. It's an illustration. And it has all kinds of footnotes explaining why this is not going to happen. And in the contract, there can be all kinds of explanation as why it's not going to happen. And sometimes the insurance company has a line that says, if we aren't making enough profit, we reserve the right to pay you less than even the 5% guaranteed minimum. Oh, then it's not guaranteed. Whatever. So if you made 8% a year, you might expect $142,000. Now, if you want to get crazy, and you know, John had told me that they might make up to 12% a year. 5 years later, she'd have $176,000. Now, on this specific annuity, and of course the problem is every one of these is unique. You can't actually take this and apply it to your annuity. It's a different contract. So it gives you ideas and you can learn the words and whatever. On this annuity, the withdrawal base is now $118,000. So for 5 years, this money has grown at a minimum of 5%, and now it's worth $118,000. Yes, I told you you should have expected, at worst case minimum, $126,000. But in this case, the withdrawal base, whatever the fuck that is, and I'll explain that in a minute, is only $118,000. Well, where'd the other $8,000 go? At this point, we don't know. We haven't been able to figure that out. Now, we might be able to figure it out at some point. I don't know that I care, because I'm not getting what I was promised. Why do I really give a shit why it's not there? It's just not there. But the funny thing is, one of the ways I look at something, like if you go to sell your house and you tell me it's worth $400,000 and the real estate agent says it's worth $300,000, and when you sell it, you get $320,000, what is your house really worth? It's worth $320,000 because two people agreed it's worth $320,000. You agreed to sell it and the other person agreed to buy it. That's what it's really worth. I mean, otherwise it's an educated guess. And I like investments that have real values, like stocks and bonds and index funds, and even just regular mutual funds. You can go look on the internet. You can go look in the Wall Street Journal, and you can find out today how much it is per share, down to the penny. It's a quote, and you could sell it. And you might get a few pennies off of that tomorrow, or a few pennies higher, or you might have to pay a trading cost or something else, but you have a pretty fucking good idea what it's worth. Well, not every investment is like that, and those investments I dislike. I dislike them a lot. But in this case with the annuity, John called the insurance agent and said, hey, if I cash this out, how much do I get? And they said $99,800. Okay, well, there's a real number. Real cash, 5 years of investments. 5 years later, I can get $99,800. Well, what happened to the 118? Well, the 118 is the withdrawal base. That's not what your investment is actually worth. That's the withdrawal base. Okay. And a lot of annuities have a surrender fee, 3%, 5%, 10%. Most common I've seen is 10% over 10 years. And we heard from the interview before, you could even have it up to 18 years. But let's just use 10% over 10 years, going down by 1% a year. So John's owned this for 5 years. If there's a 5% penalty, he will now get out $94,810. So he's lost basically 5% of his money after 5 years of investing, and was promised he was going to make at least 5% per year. But yet 5 years later, if he wants his money out, he's down 5%. Now, we talked about that withdrawal base of $118,000. That only comes into play ever if you annuitize. So it's currently in the accumulation phase, and you can change your mind and you can get out the cash value of about $95,000. If you annuitize, they are going to use that withdrawal base, however the fuck that's calculated, and they're going to pay you out 5% of the withdrawal base of your account per year. Yeah, $5,900. So you're going to get $5,900 for every year that you live. Now, without a special rider or without it writing in the contract, when you die, the payments stop. So let's go back. John Smith bought this at the age of 55. He's now held it for 5 years. He's 60. His life expectancy now at the age of 60, theoretically, normally, based on the actual periodic tables, is going to be something around 22, 25 years. You know, it's not necessarily fun to talk about, but that's the reality of it. However, John has had some serious medical issues. I would guess, without knowing, life expectancy is less than the normal 30 years. Even at 30 years, you're probably not going to get this 5% back. I mean, you're not going to get all the $100,000 back, even if you stay. And it's 5% per year. So is it 5% based on the withdrawal base? And does the withdrawal base change? Does the withdrawal base go down when you take money out? So the withdrawal base is 118. If they pay you something less than 5% and you're taking out 5%, does your payment go down every year or does it go up? At this point, we don't know. So these are all different things that can vary, again, contract by contract by contract. So without an exception, without a rider, if John were to stay in this and live 5 years,